In this lesson, we'll start to use subtools to combine multiple pieces of geometry together. So here in ZBrush, we'll rarely need to work with just one piece of geometry. A lot of times we'll need to have multiple pieces together to create our models. So under this subtools subpalette within our tool palette, this is where we're going to be able to access and create all of these different subtools that are going to exist within our particular Z tool. So right now under the subtool subpalette, you can see that there's only one. We have this 12 begin, which is the name of our file, our Z tool, and then we have a bunch of slots underneath it. Okay, we can rename this particular subtool. This is the name of our scene file, so I don't want to really change it at this point. But let's see what happens when we try to bring in some additional geometry. So you could go ahead and append the geometry that you have, or in our case, we haven't created the piece that we want to build or add yet. And so let's go ahead and build that. Now we have this current tool selected, but if we come in here and click off of it onto another tool, let's say a cylinder, that tool doesn't go away, it's still there. So just making sure that you understand that when you click on another subtool, or another Z tool rather, to work with, those tools that you've already accessed are still there, so you can always go back and access that. Now you do want to make sure that you save it out into its own file, but in here in the storage, it's still going to be there when we need it, so that we can click on it, come back in here and work with it. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on a cylinder, and we can click on one of the primitive cylinders, and let's do a little bit of shaping on this. And so I'm going to go into initialize, and let's take down the Z size so it's a little bit shorter. All right, I'm going to turn on polyframe. Let's take our V divide down a little bit. And I also want to taper the top in a little bit. So in this case, it's going to be this side. And so I'm going to go ahead and taper that in just a little. Okay, we can take the Z size down a little bit more if we want to make it a little bit shorter. And let's not taper it quite so much. So maybe something along those lines as far as the look of it here. Okay, so at this point we can go ahead and make this a poly mesh. So now we have our poly mesh here. It exists as its own thing. If you want to rename this, you can call this something like base. And now what we want to do is go ahead and go back to our mesh here, which is our ground mesh, and we want to append the base. Okay, we want to include it within this Z tool. So at the bottom of our subtool, subpalette, you'll see a button called append. And so that's the one we want to click, and that's going to bring up all the 3D geometry that we have. And it's going to allow us to pick something. So we want to pick the base. So we've picked the base, and now the base is included within this Z tool in this list of subtools. Okay, the little eyeball icon next to it will decide what is actually visible. Okay, so if I'm selected a particular subtool and I click on the eye icon of a subtool that's unselected, it'll turn the visibility off. If I click on the eye icon for the subtool that is currently selected, it's going to affect everything, and it's going to still show me the one that I'm on. Okay, so if I click on this eyeball, it's going to turn everything on or off. So if I wanted to just turn the base off, I'd have to go to this other subtool, select it, and turn it off that way. Alternatively, to select different subtools, you can Alt-click on the particular subtool. So I can Alt-click on the base or Alt-click on the ground to select a particular subtool, and you can see it in here. I can also reorder them. So if I wanted the base to be first in the list, I could move them up by hitting this button, or I can move it back down, or I can just simply select up or down. Okay, so these arrows are to select, and then these arrows are to actually move them. Okay, you can also see the hotkeys there. All right, there's also methods of reordering them. And remember, each subtool has its own subdivision levels. And so you can subdivide each subtool differently. So maybe this subtool is divided to 5 levels, and maybe this subtool is divided to 6 levels. So it's all independent, but it's saved together as one subtool. So we want to get this in position. Let's kind of rotate it. So I've got the base selected, and I want to set rotation. So I'm just going to deformation. And let's see, I don't want to rotate it on the Z, I think on the X. And so I want to rotate it a particular direction, so it's going to be minus 90 degrees. And then let's size it up a little bit. So I'm going to size it uniformly. So I'll give it a little bit of room right around there to a little bit of kind of a rim there. And let's move it up. So I'm going to offset it in the Y. We talked about different ways of moving things. If you wanted to use transpose, you could use that as well. But I'm going to just kind of offset this up a little bit so it's kind of right in here. And that's penetrating through at that point. That's okay right now. Now you can see that we've got a lot of this ground extending underneath what will be this base. That's all geometry that we don't need. And so we can actually get rid of this. Right now, looking at this particular subtool, you can see at this level we've got 900,000 polygons. This is also going to allow us to get rid of a lot of that extra geometry. So we can come down with our subdivision levels. Let's go all the way down to the lowest level. Okay. If you want to turn on your transparency, we can go to Transform, Transparency, Ghost, and that'll allow us to see things a little bit better. So this is the one that we have selected. I'm going to Control and Shift to use my Select Rectangle. And let's create a selection rectangle. And I'll hit Alt to turn it red, so it's going to make anything that's inside this disappear or turn invisible. So I'm going to pull this all the way up here with my space bar and let go. That's going to delete those. Now, it may have deleted some geometry under here. We just want to make sure that we're not getting rid of anything, and I think that's probably okay. Because this part is kind of pushed down, I just want to make sure that I'm not getting rid of anything that is inside there. So let's try this again. I think that's probably good. I don't think we touched anything down there. So now we can go into Topology, Delete Hidden, to delete that geometry that was hidden. And then we can go back up our subdivision levels and see the sculpt the detail that we have. But now we're dealing with a lot less geometry. So if we wanted to, we could subdivide this again to get some higher res detail going on the surface. We can turn transparency off. And now we've got both of our subtools in here. We've got the ground and then also the base. Now we'll be adding detail to the base as we go through this process, but the main thing is we want to get that loaded in as a subtool. If you ever want to delete a subtool, all you have to do is select a particular subtool and delete it from here. We also have options for deleting other and deleting all. So we can delete all the subtools, or if we had just one subtool that we wanted to keep, we could say delete other and it would delete everything but that particular subtool. There's also a nice plugin that you can use under ZPlugins, Subtool Master, which has a lot of functions that will work with your subtools. And a lot of times when you have functions like this, it's going to affect subtools that have the visibility on. So if you want to kind of mask out subtools you don't want it to affect, you can turn the visibility on those off. But we can merge subtools, we can append multiple subtools, we can mirror subtools across a particular axis, we can fill them with color, we can export them. So there's a lot of options in here in the Subtool Master, which we'll likely use as we go through this process. Okay, so that's a look at using subtools. You want to go in, create your additional piece, and then append it to your subtool. We could have taken the base and appended this piece as well. There's really not really a top level. I mean, it saves it out as this name, but you can think of these as all sort of equal. It's not like really a hierarchy that you would see in Maya or in the outliner where you've got things parented under other things. It's just kind of a container that contains all the different pieces that we want to use and manipulate. All right, so bring in a base for your ground here. And in the next lesson, we'll talk about your assignment for the end of this particular level. So we've gone through this process and taken our time and kind of talked about some of the different things, beginning to work in ZBrush, building up this sort of rocky base. So in the next lesson, we'll talk about your assignment moving forward before starting level 2. So we'll go ahead and do that next.